In this video, I'm going to go over some of the communication options that you should consider for while you're out overlanding. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here, and in fact, most people take several communication methods with them. Sometimes people go without, although I wouldn't suggest that at all. As I go through this, I will suggest some things based on my personal preferences, and I'll put some links to some suggested products in the description as well. I'll start with the most common, but that happens to be the worst of all of them, and that's CB. Now, I'm going to upset some people when I say this, but CB sucks. It has poor range, horrible quality, and the interference is awful. You can boost the range of the CB, but then you end up adding to the interference that other people are getting, especially if you're like this guy. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about the quality. The CB quality is just a feature of the long wavelength that it has. The reason CB is so popular though is just because it's the cheapest and the easiest. You don't need to pass a test, you don't need a license, you can just throw it in your vehicle and go. Now, if you are going to use CB, I do recommend spending some time tuning it properly and setting it up properly. Otherwise, everything I've mentioned, the quality, the range, all of that's going to be even worse. A lot of off-road clubs do require CB in your vehicle as part of their rides, and I did have it in my previous vehicle, but I ended up, when I switched to the 4Runner, I just didn't bother with it anymore, so I don't have CB. The second choice is FRS. It's Family Radio Service, and those are usually those little handheld walkie-talkie things that you can buy in Walmart, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. They are cheap and easy, but the range is really short, a lot shorter than CB, and in fact, using those inside a vehicle, you're going to be lucky to get, if you're in a convoy, you probably won't get to the end of the convoy, but you'll get a few vehicles up. They also don't require any kind of license, so they're great for families, but they're not great for traveling in vehicles. You're not going to get the range you need. For traveling in a vehicle, you really need something with better range than FRS, and the easiest option for that is to get GMRS. Now, GMRS has a lot more range because it has the radios themselves have a lot more power, and you can have a removable antenna that you can put on the outside of the vehicle. GMRS also lets you use repeaters. Now, a repeater is a fixed radio station that's going to be somewhere in your state, and if you can broadcast to that, it will pick it up and it will rebroadcast it over a much wider area. This means you can talk to people who are tens of miles away, outside of line of sight, over the mountain or over the curvature of the earth. And this means that it's great not just for vehicle-to-vehicle communication, but also emergency communication, so you could contact someone a long distance away for aid. Unlike CB and FRS, GMRS does require a license, but it is very easy to get licensed. You pay a $70 fee, and that covers you and your family for 10 years. Another great thing about GMRS is it shares some of those frequencies with FRS, and that means that if you're out traveling with someone who's maybe new to this and they don't have anything, they can quite easily pick up a walkie-talkie from Walmart and they can talk to you, you can talk to them. Because GMRS requires a license, you don't often find people who are on there just to interfere with you like you do on CB. But there are a limited number of channels, which means occasionally you can cross over with someone else who is using it legitimately. For the best experience, you want ham radio. Ham radio is my personal preference, and I've been using it for several years now. By the way, ham is not capitalized. It's not an acronym. Ham radio really just gives you the best all-round experience. You get the most power, and you have a ton of options available with it too. Just like GMRS, you can use the ham radio to chat to people close by, or you can use an extensive repeater network. Now, with ham radio, the repeater network is far more widespread, plus you'll often have repeaters that are networked one to another, like connected to one another, and not only can talk to people tens of miles away, but you can potentially talk to people hundreds of miles away who are in another state as part of a repeater network that's set up to rebroadcast across all of the repeaters that are connected together. Because of the licensing requirements and because there's not a set number of channels, you basically get an entire range of frequencies that you can use. You are very unlikely to have interference while using ham radio. If you want to get even more in depth, you can actually use ham radio to send out messages like emails while you're out on the trail. You can use it to share GPS locations so people can track you using ham radio. In order to use ham radio, you do have to pass a test, and you have to pay a $15 fee to take the test. When you first look at the test, it looks really difficult, but honestly, with a little bit of studying, it ended up being not as bad as I first thought. It's made even easier because you can actually look at the question bank online, so you can see all the questions and all the answers you might get on the test. Ham radio is definitely the best all-round option, especially for emergency communications, but it's no good if you want to just communicate with someone else who's with you and they haven't taken the test. So a lot of people end up going with GMRS instead, just because it's so much easier, and it's much easier to encourage your friends to get their license too. One more little side note before I move on. There are a lot of cheap radios sold on Amazon with poor descriptions or even misleading descriptions, and it's leading to some common misconceptions. If the radio has a number pad that you can type a frequency in onto, then it is a ham radio and it's not legally allowed to be used on FRS or GMRS frequencies. It doesn't matter what the output's set to. The other type of communication device to consider is a satellite messenger. Now, satellite messenger allows you to track your routes. You can broadcast or share your routes almost real time with friends and family. You can send out text messages, two-way text messages, and you can also broadcast SOS or emergency alerts to people. These satellite messengers do have a subscription fee, a monthly subscription, but I think it's totally worth it. I personally have the Spot X satellite messenger, and while thankfully I've never had to use this in an emergency, it has still been very useful several times. Just last summer when we were up in the North Main woods, we used it to communicate with someone back home, and they told us where the nearest gas station was just over the Canadian border. Anytime I'm out alone, I also make sure I tell my friends or my family what time they can expect me back, and I've used this several times to talk to people and let them know that either I'm going to be back later than I thought or I've changed my plans. Another option is the Garmin InReach series of satellite messengers. Now, these are a little more expensive and the monthly subscription's a little higher, but they have what's called pole-to-pole coverage. In other words, they cover the entire planet, where the Spot messengers only have kind of select regions of the planet. If you're going to North America, South America, Europe, or Australia, then you probably won't ever see the difference between the two. But if you're going to travel to Asia or Africa, to the poles, or you're overlanding in the ocean, then you'll definitely want the Garmin. Hopefully you found this video useful. It probably went on a little bit longer than it should have. These are supposed to be just a quick series of videos with some tips and some tricks. But if you did find it useful, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if there's something I mentioned that you're interested in getting, I've put some suggested products, some links to some suggested products in the description. When you use those links, it helps me out too. Thanks for watching.